left off with the Arya Stenga Marga, the Noble Eightfold Path. So here's the ways of living. And a lot of that is deduced from particular texts. And some of the texts have to do with mythical aspects of Buddha, in the sense of not these are fake stories, but in the sense of things that he said and did, and others are some of the teachings of his followers and successors. And in Buddhism, just like with Christianity, there are these different canonical councils that come together and they say, what books are our books? What are the Buddhist scriptures? And frankly, it depends on the tradition. There are more, there might be, I don't think this is literally true, but there is as great a diversity in Buddhism as there is in Christianity in terms of, we don't really call them denominations in Buddhism, they refer to them as schools. But there is a lot of variance there too. The big one that you'll probably see most people refer to is the Pali Canon. What's the Pali Canon? Wakana. Okay, that's literally Wakana. That is even related to the Latin Wakana, to say. The stuff the Buddha said. The sayings of the Buddha. Okay, that's really the scriptures there. What did the Buddha say? There's a lot of books there on this point. But there are other aspects too. So we have these little different pitakas, or different little textual bundles. Okay, so you've got like the Vinaya Pitaka. That's the stuff for what do monks do? Okay, what do the monastics do? So there's particular rules. And so we'll see this pop up too when I talk about the notion of the Buddhist community, where there's the monastics, and we saw this a little bit in Jainism too. There's a distinction between the monastics and the lay people. You also see this in other religions too, monastics versus lay people. But in Buddhism, depending on which school we're looking at, there can be a hard distinction between who's the Buddhist. Can you be a lay Buddhist? Or is a Buddhist only the monk? In some places, even in some Mahayana traditions, really the Buddhists are the monks. So even if you have Buddhist beliefs, are you really a Buddhist in the same sense? No. The Buddhists are the monks in certain traditions. In other traditions, if you have you believe in the Chatuarya Arya Satyana, yeah, you're a Buddhist. But that distinction between the identity or the notion of identity as a Buddhist is different from the notion of identity in Abrahamic religions. So, for example, I think of one time the Dalai Lama. Who's the Dalai Lama? The Dalai Lama is a leader. A lama is a leader in Tibetan Buddhism. Okay, he was one time asked, and he's very, little thing, kicked out of Tibet. There's human rights problems in Tibet, with China and all that. So he goes around the world, well-known speaker. He was once asked, I think by someone fairly young, might even been like a child. Dalai Lama, I'm a Christian. How can I be a Buddhist? And the Lama responded, if you become a Buddhist, it will make you a better Christian. And I think there's an absolutist tendency in Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. This belief system is incompatible with others. But in Buddhism, the sense of identity there, the Dalai Lama literally was saying you could be a Buddhist and a Christian. Buddhism is about certain kinds of principles in Mahayana tradition. It's really a mode of being and understanding. So there's that. The rules for monks, the stuff that the monks do, very particular. The Sutta Pitaka, these are specifically the Buddhist teachings. Okay, included in there would be stuff like in Sanskritam, the Dharma Pada or the Dhammapada, as it's called in Pali. So Pali is a language that doesn't really have its own alphabet. Here's another term that gets recontextualized. Here it is again. Dharma. Now here, quite different. What is Dharma? Well, let's go back to Hinduism. What's Dharma in Hinduism? Your duty, yes? What's Dharma in Buddhism? The teachings of the Buddha. So that seems like a great change in meaning. And it has a twofold meaning actually here. It can mean the teachings of the Buddha, and it can also mean reality itself. But sometimes you'll see some, like I could think of Nagarjuna. We'll talk about the Dharma meaning like the world. The world as Buddha taught it. So we'll have those two meanings. It can sometimes mean like the world or the universe, reality itself, truth itself, but it can also mean specifically the teachings of the Buddha, which are, of course, truth itself. They're about reality. That would be the meaning here. So there's a very different meaning for the term. Okay, not one's duty, but the teachings of the Buddha. Now, maybe you could trace a linguistic genealogy or etymology there. Maybe it's one's duty to listen to the truth of the Buddha or something like that. But that's what it means here. So here, the Dhammapada, or the Dharmapada, it's the path of the Buddha's teachings. So, and that's a slim volume. I have one in my office. I should have brought it. But that has little sayings of the Buddha, and it's not very long. Okay, so it's these little things that he says about certain teachings, all about the Chamarya Arya Satyani and the Arya Stanga Marga. And then we have this other section of Pali Canon, the Abhidhamma. All right, so what is this? There's that word, that Pali version of Dharma hiding in there. These are the additional Buddhist teachings from maybe other later Buddhists. Now, these are the scriptures, but again, that notion of scripture really seems to come from Christian presuppositions. All right, so they think these are wholly divinely inspired. No, these are just the traditions that we've got. It's not theopneustos, it's not God breathed in the same way, but these are important. And these, however, what is similar to Christianity is here councils came together, in this case, just a couple of decades after the Buddha achieved enlightenment, following the death of his body, came together to put these scriptures together in various packages, like what are we going to accept? And so they even were interviewing people to kind of like, someone who, the Buddha's, someone who, tied, was like Buddha's assistant. Like, come in here, like, did he say this stuff here? Like the stuff that, because I remember it. You remember it this way? Yeah, so they interview people and go, look, is this what happened? And that's how we come together with these texts. So that's the basic set of texts. But depending on your tradition in Buddhism, there might be other texts as well, because there are many traditions. But this is like the basic package. And if you want to narrow it down, most everyone's going to accept the Dhammapada, the sayings of the Buddha. But then there's some, well, it depends on the rules for monks. Well, what kind of monks? Because Zen monks, especially Soto school in Japan, are not the same thing as Shaolin monks in China. Even though Shaolin and Zen are part of a greater tradition of Zen. They're actually they're related, but they're not the same thing. So, for example, there, and I'll say more about this when I get to practices. Like Zen monks, what do they do? What does a Zen monk do? So we heard Zen, right? Right, they'll have their little gardens, right? Stroke the sand. It's calming, it's soothing. Not really Zen, but sure. What does one do in Zen Buddhism? A little bit Zazen in Japanese. What does that mean? Sitting meditation. Guaranteed. If you were to do that right, you both got laptops. If you Google Zen monk, you'll probably see a monk sitting down, cross-legged. More than likely. That's what we'll see. Okay, why? Because that's what they do. They sit down. Even the word Zazen, sitting meditation. Right? Okay. Whereas, if you were to Google Shaolin monk, what are you going to see them doing? They're going to be doing Kung Fu. Kung Fu is not the same thing as sitting. Why are they doing these different things? Different traditions. All right. So in Zen Buddhism, we have things of exactly how you should sit. I think of Dogen, Dogen Zenji, a Zen master, who writes this big book called, in Japanese, Shogenzu, which in Japanese is the all-seeing Dharma eye. Okay, where he talks about how to get our own Buddha consciousness by sitting properly and doing the right kind of meditation in sitting and emptying one's mind. Whereas in those Shaolin monks in Chan Buddhism, which even the word Chan is the same as the word Zen, just in Chinese, they're practicing Kung Fu. Why? Well, there's some Taoist influence there as well, which we haven't discussed. But this is mastering, it's very much like a form of yoga, in the sense of controlling one's body as much as possible to open one's own consciousness in order to achieve nirvana. And you also get a bunch of different languages here. So what are the Tibetan Buddhist texts? What language are they written in? Tibetan. Okay? The Thai Buddhist texts, Thai. And so you get these very specific cultural traditions as well. The Korean Buddhism, Thai Buddhism, Vietnamese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, again, written in the respective languages. One thing I want to explore, however, Ashoka. Has anyone heard of Ashoka? Exactly. That's why I want to put, because this is not well known, but this is something where Ashoka is really as important, I think, as Alexander the Great. So what do we have now? This is the first Buddhist emperor, king, ruler of a large area. Now, some of it's obscured there by the captions. This is the Mauryan Empire. Look at that map. Now, today, if you look at this, and this is today, India, sure, Bangladesh, here, this today, Pakistan, here we're looking at Iran. Now, some of this you might have said today, you would think of this as very Islamic, and there's a lot of Islam going on here. But what do you associate this mainly with? Hinduism, right? Notice here, so here you have, we're talking about 2,300 years ago. This is a little bit out after Alexander the Great, not that much, not really that much later. We're still here at this time. But this really Buddhist emperor, which allows for Buddhism to spread to the point where Buddhism is a dominant force in India for quite some time. When does that go away? Now notice even here, part of what we think of as Nepal would be part of the Mauryan Empire at the time. So he's like, what did he do? I'm going to put up statues about Buddha. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so we have this Buddhist emperor, and like it said there too, it's like a slow, it didn't happen all at once. But he did have a Buddhist wife already. Alright, so Ashoka is very much responsible for having the first really political form of Buddhism. But it doesn't stay in India. Alright? What happens over time, and really this happens right as about 1,000 years later, once Islam starts to come in, what happens in India is that's really when there's a consolidation of Vedanta. So we see the Hindu reaction with all the various little Hindu sects coming together as well. There's a big Vedanta. We're all Brahman, and really Buddhism starts to just kind of move this way. Now there had already been Buddhist missionaries. All you have to do is go on the other side of the mountains here, and you're in China. That had been going on for a while, and even to parts of Southeast Asia down here. A lot of trading, especially on the coast. So it had already been spreading. But really, what starts to happen is this Buddhist India. Buddhism is still in India, but it's no longer a dominant force. It almost gets pushed out entirely. There's a big Buddhist tradition in Sri Lanka too. And Hinduism kind of takes over it. But originally, I don't want to say originally, there is some proto-Hinduism going on. There's some Vedic Brahmin stuff going on, but it's not Hinduism as such. It's there. Jainism's around too. It's pretty new. But you'll notice there too, Ashoka made some edicts where all the other religions would be tolerated. So that's why, and I've said this before, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, even where they have really strong differences, it's still, hey, you know what, we'll get along here. Okay, we don't need to be, you can be wrong, but we don't need to have this really hard dialectical opposition with one another. Again, that changes with the introduction of Abrahamism. That changes. Now, I can think of two instances of that. One, Islam coming in, 7th century for sure, but also the colonization that happens here, especially by the British. Right? You will be Christians now. Okay, all over this region, even into the 20th century. So let's get into some of the rituals in Buddhism as well, which is going to vary depending on what school we're looking at too. Let's start with talking about one that I don't think I have up there that's obvious. And this is something that kind of goes back to Hinduism as well. This is the mantra. The part of centering oneself and the right mindfulness and so forth. Mantra. So making sounds, it could be like Om, or other kinds of things that are said. So especially there's a tendency in Buddhism to repeat sayings of the Buddha. So to say repeat sayings from the Dhammapada over and over again. Okay, slow. like chanting. That's one thing that's there, but that's one that we see a lot. And we also see a couple other rituals too, okay, across the board, looking at multiple schools. So this first thing I have up here, Adistana, blessing objects. So, and this depends on the tradition too. Before a building is built, Buddhist monks will show up and bless the building of a building. Right? Like the Buddha will give its power or some Buddha consciousness will give its power to make sure that everything is safe, it doesn't fall down, doesn't have any problems. Really, before everything, blessing of objects. You're going to buy a car, bless that car. And we see the blessing of objects in other religions too, but giving it that Buddha consciousness. Okay, sometimes through the chanting of various mantras as well. And we see that especially in Vajrayana Buddhism, which is Tantric Buddhism. Okay, I'll talk about that in a later. Okay, when we get to school. So that's one thing you see, the blessing of objects. But you see it especially in that Vajrayana. Then here's something else we see. It's a particular extra promises. So we already talked about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, but then there's sometimes particular extra vows that monks will say, like this. Okay? The Pranadana. Okay, this is sometimes called the Bodhisattva vow. Okay? So what is a Bodhisattva? One who's on the path of the Buddha. I'm going to be like the Buddha. What's the vow? A Bodhisattva vow is where someone says, I'm going to take on a mission to liberate or to help achieve moksha nirvana all conscious beings. I want to help them get there. It's not about just for me. I don't want to just achieve enlightenment for myself. I'm on a mission to help the world achieve nirvana. Every living being, not just myself. So obviously that's going to include things like don't harm. All right, how can I teach others? And so this is the vow. This is the vow, the simplest version of the vow. In East Asian and Mahayana Buddhism, there are particular aspects to the vow too, an additional one. So just as all the previous Sagatas, those are Buddhists, people that have achieved enlightenment, generate the mind of enlightenment and accomplish all the stages of the Bodhisattva training, so will I too, for the sake of all beings, generate the mind of enlightenment and accomplish all the stages of Bodhisattva training. I'm on a mission to help everyone achieve enlightenment, not just myself. Now that doesn't mean like I'm going to go around force converting people, because in Buddhism it's not like I need you to subscribe to a particular set of beliefs, really. It's not really that kind of dogmatism about, well, there's a God that's like this. But to achieve higher levels of consciousness and right living, Buddhist belief is its ethics and vice versa. You also see, and you see this more in Theravada, there are devotion in prostration to Buddha images, especially lying face down, okay, bowing down before the Buddha. Well, why? Is Buddha a god? Not exactly. Definitely not in Mahayana Buddhism. In Theravada, there is a sense in which he achieved something. Okay? Unlike anybody else. And that brings us to the so-called three jewels or three refuges. So if there's kind of a creed of Buddhism, yes, there's the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. But here's the thing the Buddhists say, these are the sources of refuge that we have, that we trust in. And they're threefold. Now granted, every Buddhist tradition is going to say this, and they all mean different things. I take refuge in the Buddha. So what are the three most common beliefs? There's something important about the Buddha. I take refuge in the Buddha himself. 2, I take refuge in the Dharma. What's that? The teachings of the Buddha. So there's what Buddha did, and then there's what he teaches. Well, what did he do? He achieved enlightenment, but he also said a lot of wise things about living. And then the third one here. I take refuge in the Sangha. Sometimes it's Sangha, sometimes it's Sangha. You'll see it's spelled with different letters in English. Sangha, Sangha. What's that? That is, for our purposes here, the Buddhist community. So it's analogous to like the Ummah or the church. It's not identical because it depends on whom you ask. Okay, for some, that's the Buddhist community at large. For some, that's only the monks. For some, that does not refer to a local community of Buddhists. Whereas you could say, oh, little church, big church. Doesn't work. So it depends on who you ask. Because some will get very upset if you you say the Sangha to refer to everybody that identifies as a Buddhist. Some will say, no, it only refers to the monks, because they're the ones that are really the Buddhists. So here are some distinctions between the schools too, in terms of practice. Theravada, and I'll talk about some of the schools here in a little bit too. In terms of practice here, Theravada, a lot of veneration of the Buddha himself. Okay, they'll light candles to him. You'll see a lot more images of Buddha. And here, when I say images of Buddha, I mean Buddha, like in the lotus position. Okay, that Buddha, not fat Buddha like you see in a Chinese restaurant. Okay, that's actually what that is. Why is Buddha fat? I thought he wasn't he in ascetic for a while. What's that Buddha about? That Buddha is a representation of the goodwill of Buddha consciousness. That's why he's always smiling. All right, things are going well for you. It's like the personification of the Buddha blessing. Okay, that's not Siddhartha Gautama. That's not a statue of Siddhartha Gautama. Okay, and why the big ears? Because he's listening to you. Okay. On the other hand, in Mahayana Buddhism, they'll do some of the same stuff. They'll light the same candles. There might be a statue, but there's a lot less Buddha imagery. There'll probably be a Buddha statue. It'll be more subtle. It probably won't look like a Nepalese prince. But you'll do things like light candles, but there it's meant to be allegorical. Like what happens when you light a candle? It demonstrates darkness disappearing and light coming into being. We're not doing it because we're summoning the spirit of Buddha somehow. There's more of an intellection going on. It's representation. But that's already indicative of how Theravada and Mahayana, which are the two big schools of Buddhism, are already different. You also see there, keeping of the Buddha image. This is true in Theravada and in Mahayana, but you've got that little Buddha. If you have a Buddha statue at the temple, you care for it. Okay? Now when I say care for it, it doesn't necessarily mean like in Hinduism, bringing the god food or offerings of that nature. You might, but at least tending to making sure that the statue does not go into some form of decay. And then finally, we see this in Vietnamese Buddhism, so in Southeast Asia, self-immolation, lighting oneself on fire as a form of protest. And here, I was mentioning earlier, this is Kwandi. Right here, lighting himself on fire, coincidentally, that's also the cover art for Rage Against the Machine's first album. But why is this monk lighting himself on fire? And trying to stay as calm as possible while doing it. As a form of protest. I will injure my body to do what? To protest, to get attention for things. Now, I don't mean attention in some egotistical sense. Look at me, look what I can do. But to bring attention to, I will do this to show you, I will not cause you harm. I will do this to myself to demonstrate to you that something needs to change. And in this case, this protest was happening because of the treatment of Buddhists by the Catholic government in South Vietnam at the time. This is a practice that some will perform. Self-harm. To what end? To ultimately achieve some kind of peaceful end, to prevent harm. Not the same thing. It's similar to that self-starvation in Jainism. I will cause harm to myself. There to avoid all harm altogether. Okay, of other beings. Here, I will do this to get attention. And it got attention. So we've already I've been talking about the ethics in terms of practice. So there's the Bodhisattva now. I'm going to help everybody out. But you see this here in ethics. That's Panchashila. Here are the 5 basics that are part of, these are the central tenets of Buddhist ethics, regardless of school. So if I extrapolate out, here's the basic ethics. If there are any other different beliefs, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't engage in sexual misconduct, and don't consume intoxicants. Alcohol, other things that that intentionally you're trying to get away from your current mental experience. And that's the point. Because like alcohol affects the way you think. If you're intoxicated, if you're not sober, you're not here. You're not fully here. So you're not being mindful. That's the point there. Generally speaking, again, and for that point, I'm trying to get out of the present moment. You might go, well, doesn't this stuff enhance consciousness? Maybe that's different. Okay, that's probably more. Again, different schools do different things. But generally speaking, these are the general principles that we see in Buddhism, which are very similar to other ethical traditions as well. Okay, like that, not consuming intoxicants, that's very much like Islam, frankly. And the others, you see that's ethical. Don't steal, don't kill. So killing is taken to more extreme. Alright, often you see a lot of vegetarianism in Buddhism, like we saw in Hinduism, too. That's a common phenomenon. But otherwise, we see that concluded in those principles as well. So I'm here doing this for all beings. The Sangha. So like I said, the Sangha, Sangha, depends, there's lots of different ways to spell it in English. And that is the Buddhist community. Or it's not. And by that I mean, it depends on who you ask. So for some, it means all Buddhists. And for others, it means only the monks. So you get your bhikshu, that's a male monk. Bhikshuni, a female monk, or nun, I guess you could say in English. Now again, in some traditions, and it depends on who you ask, those are the Buddhists. I believe in the life is suffering, get rid of desire, I believe all that stuff. I believe in the highest thing of my smarter, I want to live mindfully. Am I Buddhist? No. At least you're not part of the Sangha, depending on who you ask. Because that's the thing I want to get clear here. Who are the Buddhists? For many, the Buddhists are the monks. Just because you have Buddhist beliefs does not make you a Buddhist as such. Where that's very different from, say, well, to some degree, sometimes you see this in medieval Christian thought. Where, who's the church? The clergy. The lay people, that's why what happened in the Middle Ages often is, in Christianity, the laity would get the bread, but not there was a holding of the wine. They're not really the church, they don't really get the cup. So the church refers to, you see this in the Middle Ages, the church sometimes refers to the clergy or the ecclesiastical apparatus and not to all the Christian adherents. So something similar might be going on there. But so for some, and it's different in different traditions, frankly, where it be Theravada or Mahayana or some other one. But on the whole, it seems to be that the Buddhist monks are the Sangha, of which is a refuge. And even if you're not one of the monks, but you hold Buddhist beliefs, the Sangha might still be there even to do things for the community as well. The regional community, not the Sangha as such. Let's talk about some of the schools of Buddhism now. First of all, let's take a look at this one. Theravada. What does Theravada mean? Literally like the old way, or the way of the elders. So really it's the older form of Buddhism. Today you see it again, like in Southeast Asia, Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka. The focus, Pali Canon. Really, those are the texts. Oh, so Dogen wrote the Shobogenzu. That's interesting. That's not a Buddhist scripture. Pali Canon is. So really strict to the Pali language and the Pali Canon. Furthermore, there, Buddha, you notice it says Buddha is a sage. So while there is a veneration of the images of the Buddha, for sure, there, like he was wise. Right? What was I going to say here? In Mahayana, Buddha is kind of a savior figure. He saves us. Like that's why you'll see. That's why a fat Buddha will show up. Right? He's there to give you luck. Okay, you won't see the fat Buddha statues in India. Right? Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, he was an enlightened being. Okay, we should be like him. Whereas in Mahayana, we should do what we can to please him, to bring his presence. That's different. So, like I said there, Buddha in Theravada is considered he's a celebrated figure, but he's not divine in some kind of way. Not the Mahayana would necessarily say that either, despite his image. And what is nirvana? Getting outside of the cycle of samsara. That's what we want to get out. Whereas, in Mahayana, which itself means like great vehicle, like the big way, the big path, big way, which we see mainly in East Asia. And frankly, if you have like just an everyday sense of Buddhism, you're probably thinking about Mahayana and not Theravada. What's going on there? Buddha is a savior figure. And he's looking out, even now in enlightenment, he's looking out for us, and we want to get his presence. And you'll see this expression sometimes. And this, I think some of this has to do with its proximity to Taoism as well. Sometimes, and I've recontextualized it here when I say nirvana has reconstituted samsara. Sometimes you get this expression, samsara is nirvana. How could the cycle of rebirth be the escape from rebirth? How could that be? Because in Mahayana, there are really different ways of looking at the same thing. And what you see in Mahayana is a lot of this intellectual tension between things where those things seem like they would go against each other, those things seem contradictory, and embracing of the apparent contradictory. I didn't say contradictory, the apparent contradictory. That's why you see, like, koans, for example, I'll put that up there. What's a koan? It's kind of like a Buddhist puzzle that you see in Mahayana. Well, you'll be asked a question to contemplate that has no answer. Something like this. So sometimes we do this in English too, and in the West. Well, so like a koan, I'm saying this one. What is the sound of one hand clapping? And if you're going, it doesn't really make a sound. Don't answer the question. Just think about it. What would that be like? So contemplate something that is ostensibly absurd and wrestle with that. To what end? The wrestling with these things that seem apparently contradictory will get you to think about things in a new way. It's kind of like I said, the trick ones that we have in the West. Is water wet? I submit that it's not.
I hate the question.
I hate it too. But also, as a philosopher, I'm prepared to answer. My answer is no. Water makes other things wet. Okay? Stuff like a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it. Does it make a sound? Depends on what you mean by sound. Is it producing sound waves? Sure. If that's your definition of sound, sure, it's making sound. If your definition of sound is, it has to be perceived by a perceiver with an auditory apparatus, then no. If no one's there to hear it, it doesn't make sound. Depends on who you ask. But see, right there, I gave a very Western answer to that question. We'll just reduce it to its rationalistic components. In Mahayana, there's very much an emphasis that hyper-rationalism. No, we're trying to get away from that because what does that do? That makes you very dogmatic. And you know this. Like when we come up with answers like that, we're followed by that. I'm right. Okay? I can prove it to you with facts and logic. See, when you do that, though, you become very antagonistic. You ever see someone that corrects everybody all the time? Yeah, it's like too much of like you like. Yeah. No one likes that person. Like no one's like, yeah, please correct me more. Go ahead, please. And I say that while I'm in the season where I'm grading papers. Okay. Well, in there, listen. If someone does something in a paper, I'm like, okay, this is not correct here. Put on the outside. You shouldn't end. I might say there, you shouldn't end the sentence with a preposition. I'm not going to stop someone on the street. Like, whoa, whoa, whoa! You just ended that sentence with that's a preposition. It's just dangling there. Don't do that. Okay. But that's kind of what they're getting at too. When we do that kind of hyper rationalism, we end up being very dogmatic and not very peaceful. And that's why, again, with Buddhism and Hinduism and Jainism, we see them being in a conversation with each other. We have this tendency in the West too. Because of maybe the pandemic, we haven't done it in a while. But we would have these, and we've done it here too. We used to have these, recently we had a dialogue where different people from different religions came to campus. But before that, it was really popular, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, to have debates. Okay? Here's the Christian, here's the atheist, they're going to debate the existence of God. Who will win? As though the point of a debate is to win. But that's how we think of it. Like we look at it as like a match. I really destroyed them there. Okay, yeah, this side won. Why are we trying to beat the other side? It really shouldn't be, like, if we're going to have discourse or conversation, it really should be about having a conversation or discussion or discourse, not to defeat the opponent. But there's this tendency in Western thinking. I'm not saying that's universal in Western thinking, but that's the Mahayana thinking. Like, here we're going to get away from that antagonism. Because all that does is make you upset and make everybody else upset. We're trying to get away from that, right? Don't get upset about stuff. And there are different traditions that, like, in that Mahayana, Shaolin monks who go off. That Sangha, Shaolin monks live in a separate community. Way up. If you become a Shaolin monk, you're going off, away from the community, doing your own thing, studying Kung Fu. I've mentioned already Vajrayana, which may be considered its own separate tradition, but it's got enough in common with Mahayana that it's probably just a big, hefty subdivision of Mahayana. But there, you've got Tibetan Buddhism in Tibet, you've got Shingon Buddhism in Japan, which is not the only kind of Buddhism in Japan. And these are called tantric forms of Buddhism. Why are they called tantric? Well, because basically, tantric Buddhism, these are shortcuts to enlightenment. Now, not shortcuts in the sense of cheating. You can think of them as, there are extra practices, tantric practices that you can perform, kind of like yoga in Hinduism. These are things that you can do with your body to speed up getting to nirvana, if you do them right. It's not a fast track of how can I get to nirvana quicker. All right, I want the least amount of time possible. It's still going to take time. But these special practices help. That's the theme you see in Tantric Buddhism. Okay. There's Ahmadism, or sometimes called Pure Land Buddhism. This is popular in China. There's a lot of it in Japan. Now again, it's not the only kind of Buddhism in Japan. It's probably the earliest Buddhism in Japan. Not all Japanese Buddhism is Zen Buddhism, where all the city. Pure Land Buddhism is this. It's the following of, making it as succinct as possible. It's the following of Amitabha, and where, here's the belief. Before we get to enlightenment, we have to get to the Pure Land first. But right now, there's trying to get to nirvana in this life, the way things are now, is probably not going to happen. There's too many distractions, there's too much noise. So we need to get to that Pure Land first. So we'll prepare ourselves for almost a kind of, I don't want to say like a purgatory, but we need to get to our kind of intermediate space first. Now, for some, this is something that we can accomplish here. We just go out and do our own thing. For others, this is like another realm that we'll go to before we eventually get to enlightenment. But basically, we can do the best we can here. You shouldn't expect to get enlightenment in this life. We need to get to the Pure Land first, where it's easier to get to enlightenment from there. So that way you don't be discouraged. Like, I'm still desiring stuff. Yeah, that's because you're here. And this world is ridiculous. Okay? Another one you see in Japan, Nichiren. What's going on here? Here, this is an entirely syncretistic form of Buddhism. Now, Buddhism lends itself to syncretism fairly easily. What do I mean by syncretism? That's where there's a blending of religions, or blending of notions in religions, not always blending of ideas. For example, if you see a cross with a circle around it, that's a Celtic cross. Why is it a Celtic? What makes it Celtic? Oh, they have it in Ireland. Why did they have it in Ireland? Because what did the Irish pagans worship? The sun. So what do? When we have a cross, we put a circle behind it. There's your sun. All right. So that thing you think was holy. Well, now there's a cross on it. Okay. Now that does not mean that the Christians were saying, "Oh, it's fine to worship the sun." But there's a syncretism of notions there that come together. When you don't see that, you don't see that cross in other parts of the world. Right? It's distinctly Celtic because there's a blending there of these, on some superficial level, those notions. Well, we see that in Japan here with this, where there's still, there's Buddha, but there's also still the worship of local gods that haven't gone away. And there's we all have like a Buddha nature. That comes across in some of the Zen writings too. And we've all got Buddha. That is, we all are just as capable of achieving enlightenment as anybody else. Which is different from pure enlightenment. We're like, no, this is tough here in this world. No, we all got it. You can cultivate your own Buddha nature, which is kind of the root of consciousness. But all these, I just like Buddhism, Nichiren, these are all the parts of Mahayana, like subdivisions thereof. This one, on the other hand, not around anymore. Kind of like talking about the Marianites in Christianity, Marcionites, or something like that. They don't exist anymore. The Shravakaya, which literally, these are the listeners. What this means, this school, how does one achieve nirvana? By listening to wise teachers. Not a focus on the practice, like if I listen to the right speaker, if I moved in a certain way, that will have an impact on me. Okay, that will help me achieve enlightenment. Listening to the right people talk. Yeah, people do this. Like, have you heard this person speak? Have you heard this person preach? Like, it's really, that kind of, this tradition's not around anymore. It's one of the earliest traditions, which is constantly made fun of by the Mahayana school. Can you believe they thought that like, you would achieve nirvana by listening to someone talk? Come on. You have to insert some practice here. For the Shaolin monks, you have to be really good at Kung Fu. For the Zen monks, empty your mind in sitting, Zazen meditation, which we see here. In China, it's Chen, and in Japan, it's Zen. Those are actually the same word. They have the exact same character in both Chinese and Japanese. You see that sometimes, where there's the same character in Chinese, different word. That doesn't always work in Chinese and Japanese. And what's going on there again? You got that sitting meditation, especially in the Soto school, which again, Zen has its own subdivisions as well. Okay, and there's a much more. This will make more sense when I talk about Taoism as well. There's a Taoist influence there too. And in a nutshell, Taoism is a religious system which says we ought to emulate nature. And nature doesn't strive. Nature as a totality does not strive to do what it does. Like the moon doesn't have to say, oh, I guess I gotta move the tides today. It just does it without complaining. Nature just works the way it does. So there's a looking at nature and trying to emulate it in Taoism, and that has a huge influence in Japanese and Chinese Buddhism. Here, and I have two videos here demonstrating this. No, I'm not going to play here, of course, because we only have a couple minutes. Zen monks, they're going to go sit. Shaolin monks, they're training with weapons. Because here, why are the Shaolin monks fighting? I thought Buddhism was not violent. There, Kung Fu developed, part of it's Taoism, trying to be like nature. Kung Fu's movements are all about flowing movements. It's not like Taekwondo where what am I going to do? I'm going to kick my opponent. That's Taekwondo or Kempo. Well, in Kung Fu, it's almost like to flow. Almost like water, so emulating nature. But also they learn how to fight because marauders kept trying to raid the temples of the Buddhists. And they're like, we're going to protect ourselves. Here. Okay, because the Shaolin monks would kind of live off the beaten path. So they were subject to thievery. So they had to get into, no, we're going to defend ourselves. In Zen Buddhism in Japan, the monks were highly regarded. So you didn't have that same kind of thievery going on. I'm not saying it didn't happen. This isn't really important so much in Buddhism. You've got some terms, but depending on what school you're in, you're not going to use the same terms. So like the Lama, like the Dalai Lama, a leader in Tibetan Buddhism. But is there a Lama in Zen Buddhism? No. You might have a sensei. Okay, which you again going back to like Taekwondo or something. Oh, that means master. In Japanese, not exactly. It's what it is. The leader of the Sangha, like a head monk. It's like an abbot, is what a sensei is in Buddhism. And then you might have, but a sensei might also be a roshi. What's a roshi? Someone who is a master of understanding koans. Right? Those things where think without thinking. And then there's that Taoist influence as well.